we want to avoid wars, we have to have serious deterrence because our enemies need to understand we will use selective, focused, overwhelming military power when we're facing threats like an Iranian nuclear weapon.
I'm not seeing the peace through strength. I'm seeing permanent militarism and permanent war through strength.
Do you ever hold our adversaries responsible, or do you just don't think we have any adversaries?
The easiest kind of nuke to make out of uranium is a simple gun-type nuke.
Are you saying that Mossad fabricated it? That's what you're
yeah.
claiming. Here's the offer, take it or leave it. Zero enrichment, full dismantlement.
The Iranians told the IAEA, you can inspect any 5 out of 10 facilities here. Carte blanche, go ahead, and they did and found nothing.
Experts in Iran's nuclear program, including David Albright, who actually saw the archive, went in there, wrote a whole book on it. And there's a lot of detail about how Iran had an active nuclear weapons program called the MOD to build 5 nuclear weapons.
I have to refute virtually everything he just said, which is completely false.
I mean, really everything? There was not one thing I said that was true? Just one thing.
I mean, Iran is a nation over there somewhere. You got that part right.
22 years of working on Iran, and I got that right.
But do you know the population of Iran?
92 million.
Okay.
Give me a pound, dude.
There we go.
Agreement. The following is a debate between Scott Horton and Mark Dubowitz on the topic of Iran and Israel. Scott Horton is author and editorial director of antiwar.com, host of The Scott Horton Show, and for the past 3 decades, a staunch critic of U.S. foreign policy and military interventionism. Mark Dubowitz is a chief executive of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, host of the Iran Breakdown podcast, and he has been a leading expert on Iran and its nuclear program for over 20 years. This is the Lex Friedman podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description and consider subscribing to this channel. If you do, I promise to work extremely hard to always bring you nuanced, long-form conversations with a very wide range of interesting people from all walks of life. And now, dear friends, here's Scott Horton and Mark Dubowitz. Gentlemen, all right, it's great to have you here. Let's try to have a nuanced discussion / debate and maybe even steel man opposing perspectives as much as possible. All right, as it stands now, there's a barely stable ceasefire between Iran and Israel. Let's maybe rewind a little bit. Can we first lay out the context for this Iran-Israel war and try to describe the key events that happened over the past 2 weeks, maybe even a bit of the deep roots of the conflict?
Sure, Lex. First of all, thanks so much for having me on. Great to be on with Scott. I know he and I don't agree on a lot, but I certainly admire the passion and the dedication to stopping wars. So that's something we want to talk about. So let's talk about how we got to this war. So President Trump comes into office and immediately lays out that his Iran strategy is maximum pressure on the regime, and he will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And he makes that clear consistently. I think made it very clear during his first term, made it clear throughout his career. And thus begins this process with the Iranians, which has kind of multiple tracks, but the one that Trump sees most interested in at the time is the diplomatic track. And he makes it very clear from the beginning in a sort of Oval Office remark. He says the Iranians can either blow up their nuclear program under U.S. supervision or someone's going to blow it up for them. And even though, at the time we think Netanyahu is really trying to push the president into a military campaign, well, I'm sure we'll talk about that throughout the podcast, the president authorizes his lead negotiator and close friend, Steve Witkoff, to begin outreach to the Iranians, and thus begun the Oman round. And it's Oman round because it's taking place in Oman with mediation efforts by the Omanis. There are 5 rounds of negotiations with the Iranians. And through the course of those negotiations, the U.S. finally puts on the table an offer for Iran. We'll talk about the details of that. The Iranians reject that offer. And we're now into the 6th round, which is supposed to take place on a Sunday. On the Thursday before the Sunday, the Israelis strike, and they go after in a rather devastating campaign over a matter of now 12 days. They go over and go after Iran's nuclear program, the key nuclear sites, going after weapons scientists who are responsible for building Iran's nuclear weapons program, and also go after top IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard commanders, as well as top military commanders. And yet there's still this one site that is the most fortified site. It's called Fordo. It's an enrichment facility. It's buried under a mountain, goes about 80 meters deep. It's encased in concrete. It has advanced centrifuges and highly enriched uranium. The Israelis can do damage to it, but it's clear it's going to take the United States and our military power in order to severely degrade this facility. And Trump orders the United States Air Force to fly B-2 bombers and drop 12 massive ordnance penetrators, which are these 30,000-pound bombs, on Fordo in order to, as he said, obliterate it, more realistically, to severely degrade it. So that happens. And then he offers the Iranians, as he's been offering all the way through, you have an option. You can go back to Oman. I told you Oman, and you decided to force me to go to Fordo. But now we can go back for negotiations. And he forces a ceasefire on the Iranians, gets the Israelis to agree. And that's where we are today. We're at as you say, a tentative ceasefire that just came into effect. And we'll see now if the Iranians decide to take President Trump on his repeated offers, join him in Oman for another round of negotiations.
Scott, is there some stuff you want to add to that?
Sure. Well, he started with January, right? Trump's second term here and the maximum pressure campaign. Essentially, as should be clear to everyone now, all these negotiations were just a pretext for war. Trump and his entire cabinet must have known that the Ayatollah is not going to give up all enrichment. That is their latent nuclear deterrent. Their posture has been heavily implied, don't attack us and we won't make a nuke. While America's position was, if you make a nuke, if you start to, we'll attack you. So it was the perfect standoff. But what happened was, and you might remember a few weeks ago, there was some talk about, well, maybe we could find a way to compromise on some enrichment. Maybe they could do a consortium with the Saudis. Maybe there's some way that and then nope, the pressure came down. No enrichment, zero enrichment. But that's a red line. Everyone knows that and even now, it's probably less likely than ever that they're going to give up enrichment. Sure, they bombed Fordo, but they didn't destroy every last centrifuge in that place. And the Iranians are already announcing that they're already begun construction on another facility under a taller mountain, buried even deeper. And, they figured out how to enrich uranium hexafluoride gas, 20 years ago now. And they will always be able to. And this is the slippery slope that we're on with these wars. Is, in fact, I saw our friend here on TV the other day, as he almost pretty much just implied there, saying, well, now Trump has to go in. We were told it's just Israel doing it, don't worry. But then, no, Trump has to hit Fordo, or else now they'll break out toward a nuclear weapon. So in for a penny, in for a pound, in for a ton. And now, once we bomb Fordo again and Natanz again and the new facility again, then it'll be decided that, nope, as Benjamin Netanyahu said the other day, it would really solve this problem if we just kill the Ayatollah. Then everything will be fine. Then we'll have a regime change, and then what? Then we'll have a civil war with bin Ladenites again in the catbird seat, just like George Bush put them in Iraq and Barack Obama put them in Libya and in Syria. And we'll have Azeris and Baluchi suicide bombers and Shiite, revolutionaries and whoever all vying for power in the new absolute chaos stand. If you listen to the administration and Mr. Dewis, they're essentially just implying that, like, oh yeah, mission accomplished. We did it. Their nuclear program's destroyed. Now we don't have to worry about that anymore. But that's not true. Now there's every reason to believe, and we don't know for sure, there's every reason to believe that at least is much more likely now that the Ayatollah will change his mind about God changing his mind and will say that actually maybe we do need a nuclear deterrent. That's really what it's been for this whole time, is a bluff. We have bullets in one pocket, revolver in another. Let's not you and me fight and escalate this thing. It's the same position, by the way, as Japan and Germany and Brazil. Two of the three of those are under America's nuclear umbrella, I admit, but still, where they've proven they've mastered the fuel cycle and they can make nuclear weapons. But hey, since nobody's directly threatening them now, why escalate things and go ahead and make atom bombs? That has been their position the whole time, because after all, they could not break out and make a nuke without everyone in the world knowing about it. And that's why, Lex, and I'm sure you could vouch for me on this, if you've been watching TV over the past few weeks, you'll hear Marco Rubio and all the government officials and all the war hawks say, oh yeah, 60%, 60%. What do you think they need with that 60%? Implying that, oh yeah, see, they're racing toward a bomb. But you see how they always just imply that? They won't come right out and say that because it's a ridiculous lie. They could have enriched up to 90+% uranium-235 this whole time. The reason they were enriching up to 60% was in reaction to Israeli sabotage. First of all, assassinating their nuclear scientists, and then their sabotage at Natanz. They started enriching up to 60%, just like they did in the Obama years, to have a bargaining chip to negotiate away. Under the JCPOA, they shipped out every bit of their enriched uranium to France to be turned into fuel rods and then shipped back into the country to be used in their reactors. And so they're just trying to get us back in that deal. It is an illusion. It is, and I don't know exactly what's in this man's mind, but it's just not true that they're making nuclear weapons. And it has been a lie of Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party regime, and for that matter, the Kadima regime of Ehud Olmert before him, that this is a threat that has to be preempted, when in fact, it never was anything more than a latent nuclear deterrent.
Maybe a good question to ask here is, what is the goal for the United States and Iran in relation to the Iran's nuclear program? What is the red line here? Does Iran have this need for a latent nuclear deterrent? And what is the thing that's acceptable to the United States and to the rest of the world? What should be acceptable?
Yeah, Lex. So there was a lot to unpack there. So let's sort of just back up a little bit and just talk about, first of all, the regime itself. Islamic Republic of Iran came into power in 1979. It has been declared a leading state sponsor of terrorism by multiple administrations dating back to the Clinton administration, by Obama, by Biden, by Trump. And it is a regime that has killed and maimed thousands of Americans, not to mention, obviously, hundreds of thousands of Middle Easterners. It is a regime that has lied about its nuclear program. It never actually disclosed its nuclear sites. All these sites were discovered by Iranian opposition groups, by Western intelligence agencies, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN agency responsible for preventing proliferation, has come out again and again over many, many years in reports, very detailed reports, describing Iran's nuclear weapons program. There have been multiple attempts at diplomacy with Iran. I'm sure we're going to talk about it. Scott mentioned the JCPOA, so we should certainly talk about the JCPOA, which was the 2015 deal that Barack Obama reached with Iran. But multiple attempts to actually get the Iranians to negotiate away their nuclear weapons program. I mean, it's worth mentioning that if Iran wanted to have civilian nuclear energy, there are 23 countries in the world that have it, but they don't have enrichment and they don't have reprocessing. We sign these deals called the gold standard with the South Koreans, with the Emiratis, with others. And we say, if you want civilian energy, you can have power plants, you can buy your fuel rods from abroad, but there's no reason to have enrichment or plutonium reprocessing, because those are the key capabilities you need to develop nuclear weapons. Now, the 5 countries that have those capabilities and don't have nuclear weapons are Argentina, Brazil, Holland, Germany, and Japan. And I think it's the view of many administrations over many years, including many European leaders, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is very different from those aforementioned countries because that it has been dedicated to terrorism. It's been killing Americans and other Westerners and other Middle Easterners, and it is a dangerous regime. You don't want to have that dangerous regime retaining the key capabilities and needs to develop nuclear weapons. But I want to kind of get back more to the present. I mentioned this was around the negotiations at Oman. Scott's saying that President Trump had said, here's the offer, take it or leave it, zero enrichment, full dismantlement. Well, in fact, that wasn't the offer that was presented to the Iranians at Oman. The offer was a one-page offer, and it said you can temporarily enrich above ground. You've got to render your below ground facilities, quote, non-operational. And then at some time in the future, 3-4 years, as Scott said, there'll be a consortium that'll be built, not on Iranian territory. It'll be a partnership with the Saudis and the Emiratis. It'll be under IAEA supervision. And that enrichment facility will create fuel rods for your nuclear reactors. So that was the offer presented to Iran. And that offer would come with significant sanctions relief, billions of dollars that would go to the regime. Obviously, the economy there has been suffering. The regime has not had the resources that it's had in the past to fund its what I call its axis of misery, its proxy terror armies around the world. And it was a good offer. And I was shocked that Khamenei rejected it. He did reject it. And I think he rejected it because I think he believed that he could continue to do to President Trump what he had done to President Obama, which is just continue to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze the Americans at the table in order to ensure that he could keep all these nuclear facilities, all these nuclear capabilities, so that at a time of his choosing, when President Trump is gone, he can develop nuclear weapons. Now, it is a bit interesting to say that Iran has no intention to develop nuclear weapons. And let's examine the nuclear program and ask, does this sound like a regime that's not interested in building nuclear weapons? So they built deeply buried underground enrichment facilities that they hid from the international community and they didn't disclose. Okay? They had an active nuclear warhead program called the MAD, which ended in 2003 formally when the United States invaded Iraq. And we know that because not only has that been detailed by the IAEA, but actually Mossad, in a daring operation in Tehran, took out a nuclear archive and brought it back to the West. And then the IAEA, the United States, and the intelligence communities went after this detailed archive, went into it, and discovered that this supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, had an active program to build 5 atomic warheads, and was a very detailed program with blueprints and designs, all of which was designed under Ahmad to build a nuclear weapons program. So again, it's interesting to say that he doesn't have the intention to build nuclear weapons when he actually had an active nuclear weapons program. And we can talk about what happened to that program after 2003, and there's a lot of interesting details. So when you combine the fact that he has an active nuclear weapons program, he has sites that are buried deep underground, he has weapons scientists who have come out of the Ahmad program and continue to work on the initial metallurgy work and computer modeling designed to actually begin that process of building a warhead. And all of this has been hidden from the international community. He has spent estimates of $500 billion on his nuclear program in direct costs and in sanctions costs. And one has to ask, and I think it's an interesting question, to compare the UAE and Iran. Right? The UAE signed the gold standard. They said we'll have no enrichment capability or reprocessing. They spent about $20 billion on that, and it supplies 25% of their electrical generation. Khamenei spent $500 billion, and that program supplies maybe 3% of their electrical needs. In fact, they have a reactor that they bought from the Russians called Bushehr, and that reactor, it's exactly what you'd want in a proliferation-proof reactor. They buy fuel rods from the Russians, They use it and they send the spent fuel back to Russia so it cannot be reprocessed into plutonium. So I just think it's important for your listeners to understand just some of the technical nuclear history here in order to unpack this question of, did Khamenei want nuclear weapons? What was his goal here? And then we can talk about, was this the right operation in order for the United States to order the B-2 bombers to strike these facilities in what, again, was a limited operation, as President Trump has said, and in order to drive the Iranians back to the negotiating table and finally do the deal that President Trump has asked them to do since he came into office in January.
Yeah, that is one of the fascinating questions, whether this Operation Midnight Hammer increased or decreased the chance that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon.
Right. Before you ask any more questions, I have to refute virtually everything he just said, which is completely false.
I mean, really everything? There was not one thing I said that was true? Just one thing.
I mean, Iran is a nation over there somewhere. You got that part right.
All right. 22 years of working on Iran, and I got that right.
So,
but do you know the population of Iran?
92 million.
Okay.
So, first of all, they were trying to buy a light water reactor from the Europeans or the Chinese in the 1990s, and Bill Clinton wouldn't let them, and it put tremendous pressure on China to prevent them from selling them a light water reactor, a turnkey reactor that produces waste that's so polluted with impurities that you can't make nuclear weapons fuel out of it. By the way, they never have to this day had a reprocessing facility for reprocessing plutonium, even their current plutonium waste from their heavy water reactor at Bushehr, to make weapons fuel out of that. They have no plutonium route to the bomb under the JCPOA.
They have that in Iraq, not Bushehr. There's a difference between Iraq and Iraq is
where they pour
reactor.
concrete into the reactor and shut it down.
And the reason they poured concrete
under the JCPOA,
not they, but the Obama administration, he's right, under the JCPOA, poured concrete into the Calindria in order to prevent them from using that reactor to reprocess plutonium. So there's a distinction between Iraq and Bushehr. Scott's exactly right. Bushehr is a reactor, a heavy water reactor provided by the Russians, as I described, for the generation of electricity. It's proliferation proof. Iraq is the opposite. It's a heavy water reactor that was built for a plutonium pathway to nuclear weapons, which is exactly why under the JCPOA, they literally had to pour concrete into the middle of it to prevent it from reprocessing plutonium.
I think we're going to need a scientist to come in here and split the difference, or maybe we need to go and look up some IAEA documents, because I don't believe that Iraq ever had a reprocessing facility for their plutonium waste. And the deal under the JCPOA, the Russians would come and get all their plutonium waste, which the waste comes out all polluted and not useful. You need the reprocessing facility to get all of the impurities
just to
out.
Clarify,
It
really
could be
important.
that I'm wrong about that, but I don't believe that they ever had a reprocessing facility at Iraq that they could use to remove all those impurities and then have weapons grade plutonium fuel as the North Koreans do.
So the Obama administration was very clear under the JCPOA, we are going to pour concrete into the Iraq facility, as Scott acknowledged, because we are concerned that Iraq can be used for reprocessing plutonium for a plutonium pathway to a nuclear weapon.
Can be used, but we don't know if it was used.
Oh, we know it never was. There never was any reprocessing of weapons fuel there.
But there was concrete poured.
I'm happy to.
There's no indication.
For your viewers who are interested, and not to plug my own podcast, Lex, so I apologize. But
it is a very good podcast.
I just recently had David Albright on my podcast, who is actually a physicist and a weapons inspector, and goes into a lot of detail about the Iranian nuclear program. Please listen to the podcast.
Iran Breakdown, by the way, is the name of the podcast.
Yeah, and David's the president of the Institute for Science and International Security. By the way, spent decades on this. And to his credit, he was one of the deep skeptics of the Bush administration's rush to war with Iraq. And
that's not true. He vouched for claims that there were chemical weapons in Iraq and later said he was sorry for it.
Again, I mentioned the Bush administration's rush to war based on their claims that Saddam was building nuclear weapons.
He did debunk the aluminum tubes, though.
He debunked it, and he was a deep skeptic again of the rush to war in Iraq. You know, the argument today, Lex, which I think is the more interesting argument, because there are very few people left today who don't believe that the Iranians were building the nuclear weapons capability that gave them the option to build nuclear weapons.
I already said that.
We can debate whether they had decided to, and I'm interested to hear Scott's opinion on this, but the recent intelligence that has come out that the Iranian nuclear weapons scientists have begun preliminary work on building a warhead.
Came out from where? This intelligence that came out. Who put that into Israeli claims? Not verified by the U.S. and the Wall Street Journal anywhere, right?
Let's talk
about all of my list of refutations of all your false claims from 10 years ago.
The Wall Street Journal did verify.
That's a lot of
Lawrence Norman
to refute.
One at a time.
Lawrence Norman actually wrote a piece. This was during the Biden administration, because the Biden DNI had actually come out and for the first time in their annual threat assessment had removed a line that said Iran is not currently working on developing any capabilities that would put it in a position to actually deliver a nuclear warhead. And what became the Lawrence Norman piece in the Wall Street Journal was that there actually was initial work done on metallurgy and on computer modeling. And so those actually were defined terms in Section T of the 2015 JCPOA, which defined weaponization in that section. And metallurgy and computer modeling were some of the initial steps. So the DNI was very concerned under Biden that these initial steps meant that either Khamenei had given the green light or nuclear weapons scientists, in order to get ahead of the boss so they could be in a position, if he decided to move forward on this, were in a position and their timelines were therefore expedited. So it's interesting. I mean, again, you've got the DNI under Biden, you've got the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, you've got Israeli intelligence, you've got the Wall Street Journal, and you've got the IAEA asking questions of Iran on its past weaponization activities. Why are you denying us?
Who's the dog that didn't bark there? The current director of national intelligence, who issued her threat assessment. Trump's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who issued her threat assessment in February, that repeated the exact same language that from the national intelligence estimate of 2007, and that the CIA and the NIE, the National Intelligence Council, have reaffirmed repeatedly ever since then, which is that Supreme Leader has not decided to pursue nuclear weapons. He has not made the political decision to pursue nuclear weapons. She testified, in fact, under oath in front of the Senate in March. And then, according to CNN and the New York Times, there was a brand new assessment that was put together the week before the attack was launched, reaffirming the same thing. And at least in history, if you read it in Haaretz, Mossad agreed with the CIA.
I'd like to just sort of quote CIA Director John Ratcliffe, because Scott brought up the CIA and the intelligence committee. I think Ratcliffe had a good way of looking at this, and that he said is, when you're in the 99-yard line as a football team, you have the intention to score a goal, quote unquote. And what he was actually pointing to is, let's not talk about this debate about whether Khamenei had given the order or not given the order, because Khamenei knows that if he gives an order, the U.S. and Israeli intelligence community will pick up on that order, and that will be the trigger for strikes. What Ratcliffe is saying is that Khamenei had built the nuclear weapons capability. He's at the 99-yard line, and both the CIA and European leaders, the European intelligence community has said for years that if Iran has that capability and they're on the 99-yard line, at that point it's going to be too late to stop them. Once that decision is made to assemble the final warhead, which, by the way, is the final piece of what you need for a deliverable nuclear weapon.
So that's not true at all, right? They have to resort to a crude analogy about football yard lines because they can't say the truth, which is that they had zero weapons-grade uranium. They were not producing it. They were trying to get the United States back in the deal that they are still officially within, the JCPOA with the rest of the UN Security Council, wherein they shipped all of their enriched uranium stockpile out of the country to France to be transferred to fuel rods. Their insistence was on their continued ability to enrich uranium. And so this goes to one of the things that he at least sort of brought up that deserves addressing. When Trump came into power in 2017, he decided on this Israeli influence maximum pressure campaign.